She told me over meatloaf. That's the part one can't shake. Of all the nights, of all the ways, it was Tuesday, and she made meatloaf. Her "sorry it's been a long week" meal, which was ironic since she hadn't been home since Friday. She breezed in wearing that lavender cardigan I bought her 10 years ago in Monterey, poured herself a glass of red, and hummed while setting the table like nothing was wrong. Like she hadn't disappeared for 4 straight nights with vague texts and zero explanation. Like the scent on her scarf that wasn't perfume didn't hang in the hallway like a dare. She set the plate in front of me, sat down across the table, folded her hands, and said it. No build-up, no apology, no attempt at softening the blow. I'm in love with Connor. I didn't respond right away, mostly because I was still chewing. Then she added, always have been. You'll never understand us. He's my soulmate. I blinked. Connor. The name hit like a golf ball to the temple. Connor. The stepbrother she barely mentioned for a decade. The man I'd shaken hands with twice, once at her mother's wedding to his dad, and once when he crashed a 4th of July cookout wearing cowboy boots and quoting Bukowski. Connor, who once flirted with our daughter's college roommate and made Melissa roll her eyes so hard I thought they'd get stuck. I stared at her, and for a moment, I thought maybe I'd misheard. Connor, your stepbrother? She didn't flinch. Didn't even pretend to feel awkward. We're not blood, she said. Like that made it a TED Talk instead of a confession. This is destiny. Destiny. That's the word she used, as if screwing your stepbrother in hotel rooms while your husband balances trust accounts for dead clients is just part of some divine blueprint. I didn't shout. I didn't flip the table. I just sat there while the meatloaf got cold. She pushed her wine glass in slow circles on the table and gave me a look that was both pitying and triumphant, like she thought I'd break down, cry, maybe offer her my blessing. I wish I could say I felt some big cinematic heartbreak, but all I felt was static. Cold, dense static behind my eyes. Like my brain was buffering. Connor understands me, she went on, eyes shining like she'd been waiting years to deliver this monologue. With you, I feel like I'm always performing. You don't see me. Not really. That part almost made me laugh. I'd spent the last 15 years making her life so goddamn easy. She didn't even know where our insurance policies were kept. I did everything. The bills, the taxes, the finances, her car maintenance, her stupid yoga retreat bookings. I even managed her mother's prescription refills because Melissa said she couldn't handle the paperwork. She picked up her fork again like it was just another Tuesday. I watched her chew and thought, you really don't think this is going to cost you anything, do you? That was the moment something flipped inside me. Not rage. Not grief. Something smoother. Quieter. A thin, precise click. Like a lock turning. It's not just that she cheated. It's that she expected a standing ovation for it. She kept talking after that. I don't remember the rest. Something about how it's been building for years, and how she felt trapped in our safe little bubble. She used a lot of therapy words she'd picked up from podcasts and half-read books. Authenticity, alignment, emotional honesty. And then she said something that, I think, will echo in my head until the day I die. I think you'll actually be happier without me. You're such a stable man. You don't need chaos. You don't thrive in passion. I looked at her. Really looked. And I realized she had no idea who I was. She thought my silence was passivity. My routines were weakness. My restraint? A lack of fire. She didn't know I'd already written the ending to this story years ago. She didn't know the fuse was already lit. She stood up, kissed me on the forehead like I was her aging uncle, and said, I hope someday you understand this wasn't about hurting you. Then she grabbed her coat and walked out into the night. I sat there a while, letting the silence settle in around the wine glass ring on the table. Then I pushed the plate away, stood up, and walked to the office. I had something to find. She walked in like it was a casual brunch. Light steps, Starbucks in hand, sunglasses perched on her head even though it was cloudy out. Sophie, 22, all grown up and glowing with the kind of unearned confidence that only comes from never having to clean up someone else's mess. I hadn't seen her in weeks, college, boyfriend, work, the usual. When I texted her, asking if she could come by, I thought I might get a glimmer of sanity. I thought maybe, just maybe, she'd walk in furious. Maybe she'd yell, demand answers, ask how the hell her mother had ended up in bed with her own stepuncle like we'd suddenly been written into a Tennessee Williams play. But she just strolled in like this was any other family update. She gave me a quick hug and said, "So Mom told you." That's all. No build-up. No shock. Just, "So Mom told you," like she was referencing a Netflix spoiler. I stood there by the kitchen counter, coffee half drunk, still in the same clothes I'd worn for 2 days. Sleep hadn't come easily since the meatloaf night. I tried to gauge her tone, her expression, any sign that maybe she was processing this with the appropriate level of revulsion. But her face was soft, almost dreamy. She plopped down on the couch, crossed her legs, and said it with that patronizing, half-pitying tone she picked up in her Psych 101 course. "Honestly, Dad, they've always had a special bond." The air left the room. I couldn't even muster a sarcastic quip. I just stared. She smiled like this was some cosmic love story unfolding. Like this was a win for the universe. "I mean, think about it," she continued, setting down her coffee. "They've always just gotten each other. I used to wonder if something was going on, to be honest. They just had this connection. Maybe it was just meant to happen. Meant to happen." I looked at her, this girl I'd raised, fed, taught how to drive, stayed up with during fevers and heartbreaks, and realized she wasn't standing beside me. She wasn't even in the same room. She was over there with them, clapping at their twisted little love story like it was some kind of triumph over oppression. The oppression, I suppose, being me. I sat down slowly. My knees felt heavier than usual. There was a long silence. Long enough that I hoped she'd feel it. But she didn't. She picked up her phone and started scrolling like she'd just checked "support my mom's affair" off her to-do list. "Did she tell you they're thinking of moving in together?" she said casually, not looking up. That was when something in my chest pulled tight. Not broke. Not snapped. Just pulled. Like a piano wire winding just a little too far. I remember thinking, so this is what it feels like when the last person you trust shifts to the other side. "You're okay with this?" I finally asked, my voice low. She blinked and looked at me like I'd asked if she liked her coffee. "I mean, yeah. It's weird, sure. But they're happy. And Connor's always been good to me." "Connor." She said his name with ease. Like he wasn't the man who used to leer at her friends. Like he wasn't the creep who once drunkenly told me Melissa had the best hips in the family. Like I hadn't caught him skimming bourbon from my cabinet back in 2012 and excused it as family tension. And now he was Dad 2.0. I wanted to scream. I wanted to grab her shoulders and shake something loose. But instead, I just sat there, listening to her talk about their plans like she was pitching a startup. At one point, she said, "You'll be okay, right?" And the casualness of it almost made me laugh. I looked at her and realized something cruel. She didn't want me to be okay. Not really. Because if I fell apart, she could justify being on their side. If I lost it, she could tell herself that this was why her mom left. So I gave her what she needed. I nodded. Said nothing. She stood up, kissed the top of my head, and said, "I think this is for the best." Then she walked out of my house. I watched the door close behind her. The same door I'd carried her through on her 5th birthday because she refused to walk after a fall. The same hallway I paced through on sleepless nights when she had ear infections. And now she was gone. Not just physically. Gone. 2 people I would have taken bullets for had just informed me, calmly, politely, with smiles and coffee, that I was no longer necessary. No longer invited to the version of family they were building. But that was fine, because I still had the envelope. I left before the coffee finished brewing. She was still asleep upstairs, in the bed I'd bought when my back started going bad 5 years ago. I remember because it took me a month to find the right firmness, and 2 weeks later she said it felt clinical. Too stiff, like everything else I chose. I didn't write a note. Didn't slam any doors. Just zipped the suitcase, paused by the front hallway to look at the dent in the drywall from where Sophie launched her first soccer trophy at age 8, and walked to the office. The drawer was 3rd down on the left. Cherry wood, dull brass handles. I built that cabinet with my brother back when we still talked. Funny how everyone seems to drift when they know too much. I pulled it open and let my hand hover for a second over the rows of neatly labeled folders. Taxes, real estate, firm agreements, grandfather's war bonds. Then I saw it. Thick, white, sealed with a blood-red sticker tab. Labeled in my handwriting. If she ever leaves. It wasn't dramatic. Wasn't it just in case she cheats fantasy like some angry husband's draft in whiskey haze? I'm not that sentimental. I wrote it the night she came back from that so-called self-discovery retreat in Sedona and smelled like smoked cedar and guilt. It was the same night she told me she didn't believe in monogamy in the traditional sense anymore and asked why I couldn't try evolving too. That was 4 years ago. That night, I'd stayed up in the office, poured a scotch, and rewrote our estate plan. Not out of spite, out of instinct. The kind that kicks in when you know, deep down, someone's not just pulling away. They're plotting a departure. A calculated, smiling betrayal. The envelope contained 6 documents. All of them notarized, witnessed, legally bulletproof. I'd had a friend at the firm review them off record, no names. He thought it was theoretical. A client case. It wasn't. The beauty of estate law is that if you're meticulous, if you really plan, you can make silence into a weapon. People underestimate quiet men. They assume we'll crumble when the storm hits. What they don't see is that we build during storms. I placed the envelope into the side pocket of my suitcase. The rest of the drawer I left untouched. She'd ransack it eventually once she realized she didn't actually understand how any of this worked. She'd open file after file looking for something to claim, but she wouldn't find it. Because all the strings that looked like they connected to our life, the business, the house, the trusts, had been quietly rewoven into a web she couldn't even see, let alone untangle. I zipped the bag, stood up straight, and looked around the office one last time. My diplomas hung above the desk, slightly crooked. The plant by the window had been dying for months. I'd been the only one watering it. Figures. I stepped into the hallway, past the photos, all the glossy, curated shots of a family that had never actually existed. There was one from our 10th anniversary in Napa. Melissa wore that black dress she said made her feel expensive. I looked at it now and didn't feel a thing. Just a dull curiosity, like flipping through a stranger's wedding album. At the front door, I hesitated. The silence of the house was thick, unnatural. I could almost feel the echo of what she'd said 2 nights ago. This is destiny. Yeah. And sometimes destiny gets documented, notarized, and filed under irrevocable. I stepped outside, closed the door softly behind me, and drove away without looking in the rearview mirror. The first time I noticed it, the pull, the retreat, was so subtle it could have been chalked up to seasonal blues. She stopped reaching for my hand at dinner. Her laugh became quieter. Her phone was always face down, and her showers always longer. At first, I told myself it was work stress, hormones, the usual suspects you blame when you don't want to face the actual threat standing in your own damn kitchen. But I've spent a career reading people's blind spots, especially the ones they leave in ink. And Melissa? She started leaving blind spots all over the place. So I did what I was trained to do. I started writing. Not journals, not angry letters. No, I rewrote futures. I spent nights drafting documents that, if you glanced at them, looked like routine updates, the kind we do for wealthy clients every year. But every clause, every decimal, every trust line was drawn with one outcome in mind: extraction. Not from her. From the fantasy I'd been sold. I moved the business, Hayes Financial, into a holding structure with dual trustees, me and a former mentor of mine who lives in a cabin and hates drama. I rewrote the deed on the house so that technically, the property was owned by a foundation I'd created in honor of my father, who hated Melissa with Olympic-level enthusiasm and who'd once told me, she's a smile with teeth behind it. The pensions? Folded into irrevocable trust with triggering clauses based on abandonment. Inheritance from my father? Already long separated, disguised within generational skips and asset shields with iron locks. Every move done quietly, legally, and years in advance, long before she ever packed her overnight bag with lingerie, just in case the spa had a hot tub. I remember the day I printed the master set. It was raining, not the cinematic kind, just that boring, sideways drizzle that feels more like irritation than weather. Melissa had left her email open, and I saw a message to someone named CJ that ended with "Can't wait to see you again. Miss the way you hold me after." She told me she was seeing her mother that weekend. I didn't react. Didn't even breathe heavy. I just clicked save, moved the final clauses into place, and printed the package labeled "If she files first." 7 taps, 1 notarization pre-scheduled, all of it stored in my fireproof cabinet under a decoy file named Retirement B. Years passed. We played house. She drifted further. She talked less. She grew bolder, louder absences, bolder gaslighting. Once, she even said, "You're so lucky I haven't just walked away. Most women would." I smiled and said, "I suppose I am." She thought that was surrender. It wasn't. It was set up. So when the email hit, from her lawyer, of course, with the subject line, Hayes divorce filing, initial petition, and demands, I didn't flinch. I opened my cabinet, pulled the envelope, walked to the printer, clicked print. The machine hummed like it was printing menus for a catered wedding. 15 years of marriage, and it all came down to black ink on cotton bond paper. Her attorney thought this would be simple. Standard division, spousal support, maybe a partial claim to the firm. After all, Melissa had supported me emotionally while I built the empire. Funny thing about empires, they don't belong to people who sit courtside cheering. They belong to the ones who build the walls. So I stacked the papers, clipped them neatly, and placed them into a folder titled Final Response. No anger, no shaking hands, no smugness, either. Just the quiet satisfaction of a man who knew this moment was inevitable and made peace with it years ago. She'd made her move. She thought I'd panic, thought I'd grovel, maybe fight to keep her from leaving. Instead, I just printed the end credits. She showed up with a folder and a fresh blowout. Hair curled, nails immaculate, sunglasses tucked into her collar like she'd just wrapped brunch with a senator. Behind her trailed a man in a navy suit that screamed least confidence, Darren something, her attorney. Early 40s, designer watch too tight on his wrist, a smile that looked practiced in front of bathroom mirrors. The kind of guy who probably winked at paralegals and said things like, "I'm a closer." I opened the front door like a man greeting the weather. Melissa stepped inside like she owned the place. She didn't even look at the photos anymore, the ones she used to fake nostalgia over when guests were around. Us in Tahoe. Us in Florence. Sophie as a toddler, covered in birthday cake. She walked past them now like they were exhibits in a museum she didn't respect. Darren set his briefcase down on the dining table like it was a stage and began unpacking. She smiled at me, that wide, rehearsed smile she'd been perfecting for years. "Let's keep this civil, okay?" she said, like I was the one who'd broken the script. He slid the manila envelope across the table and started his pitch. "This is a fair division. Very standard. We're asking for 50% of the shared estate, reasonable alimony, and partial control over Hayes Financial, given Melissa's long-term support of the business. There's precedent. Support. As in, not interfering while I built it from the ground up. As in, occasionally asking if those quarterly numbers are still okay, while she browsed yoga retreats. As in, showing up to one corporate dinner a year and spending half of it critiquing the appetizers." I didn't flinch. I didn't argue. I took the folder, flipped it open, and read. Half the estate. Monthly spousal maintenance indefinitely. Executive access to Hayes Financial decisions, pending valuation. She was going for the jugular. And she thought it was a spa massage. Melissa leaned across the table and tapped the edge of the packet. "I'll make this as painless as possible," she said sweetly. "Just sign it, and we can all move on." I met her eyes. There wasn't anger in mine. No resentment. That would have thrilled her, would have made her feel powerful. Instead, I smiled. Not smug. Not fake. Just the quiet curve of a man who's known the ending for a very long time. "Of course," I said. "I'll sign everything." Darren blinked, clearly unprepared for zero resistance. Melissa tilted her head slightly, as if confused. I looked down again at the papers, pretending to read them a second time, not because I needed to, but because I enjoyed watching her bask in her illusion of control. This was her Oscar moment. The victorious ex-wife. She'd rehearsed it in her head. Probably told her book club some sanitized version. Derek just wasn't emotionally present, and Connor really sees me. I could see it all over her face. She thought she'd won. What she didn't know was that the estate she believed she was dividing had been gutted long before she arrived at the table. She thought she was carving up a mansion. She didn't know it was already ashes. "Can we get this notarized tomorrow?" Darren asked. "Absolutely," I said. Melissa nodded, relieved. She truly believed this was going to be smooth. Simple. Bloodless. I escorted them out like a good host. Darren shook my hand, a little too firm, a little too performative. Melissa looked at me one last time before getting in the car. "You're being very mature about this," she said. I nodded. then watched them drive away, tail lights blinking like signals from another universe. When they turned the corner, I stepped back inside, closed the door, and walked to my office. There was a folder already waiting on my desk, labeled Response for Filing. Inside, all the signatures, all the redirection, all the protection. I slid the divorce packet Melissa gave me into the drawer next to it. And then I laughed, not because it was funny, but because the trap had already closed. And none of them heard the click. Her office didn't have art on the walls, just certifications, shelves of casebooks, and a silent coffee machine that looked like it hadn't worked in years. The whole space had the sterile, focused energy of someone who didn't decorate because they didn't need to. Marla Costas didn't do empathy. She didn't lean forward and ask if I was holding up okay. She greeted me with a clipped nod, motioned toward a chair, and said, "Start talking." I slid the folder across her desk. She opened it, adjusted her glasses, and within 30 seconds I saw it, the grin. Tight, precise, clinical, like a surgeon spotting an artery right where it needed to be. "Ah," she said, flipping to the trust documents I drafted myself. "So you're not just a quiet man. You're a dangerous one." "I'm a planner," I replied. She scanned in silence for a full 5 minutes, only interrupting herself to mutter, "Jesus, you really buried the lead." When she got to the last clause, the abandonment trigger linked to irrevocable trust transfer, she leaned back and said, "Oh, she thinks she won already." I nodded. "Perfect," she said, tapping her pen against the desk like she was already outlining the pressurized points. "She's walking into court thinking this is about division. It's not. It's about illusion. She's going to get exactly what she asked for, and not 1 cent more." I didn't have to explain Melissa to her. Marla had seen the type before. "She's the kind that treats loyalty like it's a customer service issue," Marla said. "She expects 5-star treatment while she explores her options. And if you complain, you're the problem." She got it. We worked fast. Marla restructured the response paperwork into something deceptively clean. A lean 8-page reply that didn't argue, didn't contest, didn't even look defensive. It simply agreed, with language so polished, so calmly compliant, that it would lull any halfway decent attorney into a false sense of dominance. Melissa's team wanted half the shared estate? Sure, but we let them define that estate exactly as they misunderstood it, because nowhere in their filings did they reference Hayes Financial Holdings, the protective trusts, or the foundational shell accounts I'd created years prior. They went after the house. We agreed to their valuation, which was frozen in legal terms 5 months ago, before I had the home's title reassigned to the family trust as part of future charitable use. They asked for partial executive access to the business. We accepted, to the entity that technically no longer held any profitable assets. Hayes Financial as a shell existed. The money, however, had long since been moved to a protected structure 2 layers removed, where she'd need both my signature and a second trustee's consent to touch a dollar. She'd get what she demanded, the surface image of victory. But it would be like trying to eat a photograph of food. Marla emailed the draft to me for review and said, "You'll be the most generous ex-husband the court's ever seen. And she won't realize the catch until the ink's dry." I said, "That's the best time," she smirked. "When they're already posing for the picture and the floor drops out." I signed everything that afternoon. Not out of bitterness. Out of design. Melissa wanted to win. So I built her a trophy out of hollow wood, polished it until it gleamed, and placed it right in the middle of the table. Let her hold it up. Let her wave it around. The bottom would fall out soon enough. It was a Wednesday, mid-morning, and I was reviewing a client file when my phone buzzed. Not a call. A notification, one of those social media alerts I normally ignored. I kept the apps mostly to keep track of Sophie. Not to snoop, just to know she was okay. That was always my excuse. I opened it without thinking, and there it was. A photo. Sophie, smiling, holding a glass of white wine. Melissa next to her, glowing like a woman half her age, in that low-cut wrap dress I once complimented her in before she started dressing for herself. And across from them, arm casually thrown over the back of Melissa's chair like he owned her, Connor. Caption: Dinner with Mom and Connor. Family always finds a way, blue heart. I stared at it, not in shock, not even in pain, just fascinated, like watching a painting melt in real time. They were sitting at Truss and Timber, an upscale bistro downtown where Melissa and I used to go for our anniversary dinners. I recognized the marble wall behind them, the wine glasses, the teal napkins folded just so. That place was a ritual, a symbol. Now it was just another canvas for her victory parade. Family always finds a way. That was the part that caught me. It wasn't just the smugness. It was the rewrite. The audacity to reframe adultery with a blue heart emoji and serve it like a Hallmark moment. My daughter, our daughter, was posing like they were the Brady Bunch, and I was the weird uncle who died off-screen in season 2. I scrolled the comments. So happy for you guys. OMG, such a beautiful family, smiling face with hard eyes. Connor looks like he belongs. He belongs. Yeah, like a splinter in bone. But here's the thing. I didn't feel what I expected. No rage. No heartbreak. I just felt steady. Because while they were out toasting to fate, I was at home, sharpening the blade they didn't even know existed. That's the danger with people like Melissa and Connor. They think the absence of a fight means surrender. They think if you don't scream, you're broken. If you're quiet, you're weak. They've never learned what still water hides underneath. I saved the post. Not for evidence. I didn't need it legally. I saved it because it was art. The perfect moment. The peak before the fall. The snapshot of a woman celebrating at a feast she thought she'd cooked, when in fact, she was the dish. They thought the hearing next week would be a formality. Melissa told Sophie it would be quick and clean. Told her they'd go out after and celebrate turning the page. And they probably would. Connor in that awful linen blazer. Melissa glowing in post-victory haze. Sophie clapping along like a flower girl at a wedding that should never have been written. I closed the app and placed the phone face down. The hammer was nearly ready. The handle carved, the weight balanced. Not out of vengeance. Out of engineering. And in 1 week, I'd let it fall. She walked in wearing white. Not ivory, not cream. White. Like it was some twisted vow renewal and she'd just been waiting for the aisle. The irony wasn't subtle, but Melissa never did subtle. She liked symbolism she could weaponize. A dress that said rebirth. Heels that said I'm above this. And a walk that screamed victory lap. Connor followed close behind, smirking like the sleazy best man at a shotgun wedding. He wore that same smug confidence, the kind of look men wear when they've never built a damn thing themselves but still think they've earned it. His shirt was half untucked, like he wanted people to know he was too cool to care, even in court. And then there was Sophie, my daughter, wearing soft blue, holding her mother's hand like she was leading her down a sacred aisle. Her face was carefully curated, polite smile, no makeup, chin high. I couldn't tell if it was defiance or confusion. Maybe both. Maybe she didn't know whose side she was truly on yet. But her body language gave it away. She was standing in their pew now. They walked past me without a glance. Like I was the waiter at their celebration lunch, not the man who once carried them both through storms they didn't even see coming. I sat at the front, alone. No entourage. No distractions. Just a clean suit, quiet hands, and a folder that sat neatly in front of me, centered on the table. Labeled, Final. Marla entered 5 minutes later, phone in hand. Eyes locked and surgical. She gave me a sharp nod and sat down beside me, flipping open her own binder like she was prepping a scalpel. Her entire presence hummed with restrained voltage. She didn't even glance at the opposition. Melissa and Darren sat across from us. She didn't look tense. In fact, she looked relaxed, like this was her post-breakup yoga class and she already knew the final pose. I caught the moment her eyes flicked to the final tab on my folder. She tilted her head, smirked, thought it was performance art. She had no idea. The judge entered. We rose. Everyone sat. Formalities. Introductions. Oaths. Melissa's lawyer started in with the preamble. Words like amicable, cooperative, equitable. He ran through their requests with the smug cadence of a man expecting zero friction, 50% of joint assets, spousal support, business equity. He spoke like we were all here to rubber stamp a coronation. When it was our turn, Marla didn't stand immediately. She waited, let the air stretch just a second too long. Then she rose, smiled, and said, "Your Honor, My client has no objections to the division as proposed. We have prepared a full agreement with all requested concessions, alimony, estate division, business shares signed, sealed, and ready for the court's review. Melissa blinked, surprised. That wasn't the line she'd expected. Darren smiled, eyes flicking to Melissa in triumph, like, see, told you we scared him straight. The judge nodded and said, let's review the documentation, then. Marla handed over our file. Melissa leaned over to glance, brows furrowed now. I didn't say a word. Didn't move. I just watched her from the corner of my eye, watched her waiting for the catch that wasn't coming. Because it had already happened. The trap didn't need a spring. It was the floor beneath her, and it had already vanished. The pin felt heavier than it should have. Not because of sentiment, that part had burned out weeks ago. No, it was the weight of precision. Years of planning, lines rewritten, signatures preloaded like bullets in a quiet war. I didn't hesitate, though. I opened the folder labeled Final, slid the pages out, and signed each line with clean, practiced strokes. No questions. No stalling. No fight. Across the table, Darren grinned like a man who just closed on beachfront property he didn't realize was underwater. Melissa sat beside him, arms neatly folded, looking like a woman watching a dream unfold exactly as she storyboarded. She leaned slightly over the polished oak and whispered, just loud enough for me to hear. Thank you for being decent about this. Decent. That word. The way she said it, like I was some pitiful ex-boyfriend returning her favorite sweater and finally finding closure. I didn't respond. Just nodded once, slowly, and turned back to the final signature. Darren handed the packet to the clerk with a look of victorious restraint. The kind that says I win, but I'm too professional to gloat. Melissa squeezed his arm like she was congratulating herself for choosing the right team. And still, I said nothing. Because silence, in the right hands, is louder than screaming. The clerk took the documents, checked for initials, and passed them to the judge's assistant. Melissa crossed one leg over the other, adjusting her dress like she was preparing for applause. Even Sophie gave a small smile from the bench behind her, as if she was proud of how graceful her mother was being during this transition. They really believed it was over. They thought the show was wrapping up nicely, no mess, no backlash. Melissa likely imagined herself walking out of the courtroom to a new life where she got the house, half the business, and a daughter who never questioned her new truth. That's what she'd always wanted, a clean escape with the illusion of dignity. And I gave her exactly what she wanted. On paper. Because here's what they didn't know. Every asset they believed they were dividing had already been legally migrated, redrawn, shielded, months before she ever filed. Everything she saw as ours was, by then, mine and no longer accessible. Every line she claimed was fair was a mirror, one way, designed to reflect her ambition back at her while concealing the chasm behind it. She had the outline. I held the architecture. And now the signatures were locked in. She thought I was defeated. She thought I was docile. But all I'd done was let her decorate the cage. She kissed the air in my direction as the judge flipped through the packet. A final insult disguised as civility. Behind her, Connor leaned back smugly, arms crossed, not even pretending to respect the process. He thought it was all over too. A clean break. No drama. Maybe he thought I'd cry in the parking lot. Maybe he thought I'd try to win her back. They were both wrong. The page turned. The final line was read. And in 15 minutes, the trapdoor would open. The silence in the courtroom shifted, not loud, not sudden, but dense. The kind of silence that makes people sit straighter without realizing why. Even the clerk glanced up from her screen. The judge, a tall man with silver hair and the emotional expressiveness of a parking meter, adjusted his glasses and cleared his throat. His tone wasn't accusatory, just curious. But that made it worse. Ms. Hayes, he said, flipping through the final stack of forms we had submitted. Before I proceed, I'd like to confirm that you've reviewed your financial rights and entitlements with your attorney. Melissa tilted her head. Her mouth twitched, just slightly, like she didn't like the direction of the tone. Of course, she said, with that faux polite edge she used with waiters who brought her the wrong wine. Darren chimed in, chipper. We've reviewed everything thoroughly, Your Honor. The judge nodded. Then you're aware, he continued, turning another page, that the estate being divided reflects an approximate total of $48,000 in shared liquid assets, and that the entity formerly known as Hayes Financial, along with all related trusts and property holdings, are excluded from the marital estate due to irrevocable restructuring prior to filing? Melissa blinked. For the first time all morning, she stopped smiling. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice suddenly sharper. "What did you say?" The judge didn't look up. "The shared checking account is listed at $48,320. The rest, including all corporate shares, retirement holdings, and real estate, are currently held in protective entities not subject to division under the current agreements. You did initial each section." He paused. "Twice." Melissa's head turned toward Darren like it was on a pivot. "That can't be right," she hissed. Darren flipped rapidly through his copy. "No, we were under the impression that—" But the judge cut him off. "The language is clear. The respondent," he gestured toward me without looking, "disclosed all financial documentation. Your filings did not object or provide any evidence to the contrary. You consented to the division as written." Melissa sat up straight now, her voice trembling but trying to hide it behind anger. "That business is ours. I supported it for 15 years. I'm entitled to it. What you signed for," the judge said flatly. Connor uncrossed his arms behind her. His smirk had wilted. "I didn't move. Just watched." She turned to Darren, eyes wide. "You told me." "I was not made aware of these asset protections," he stammered. "These trusts, this is complex structuring. It's not standard." Marla, calm as ever, finally spoke for the first time. "They were filed legally and properly, Your Honor. All disclosures were included in our responses. If opposing counsel failed to review them fully, that's unfortunate, but not our burden." The judge nodded again. Melissa's face turned blotchy, not from crying, not yet, but from realization. That creeping horror when a person realizes they're not in a courtroom anymore. They're in a cage they helped weld shut. She looked at me, not with fury, with panic. I held her gaze, just long enough. She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Her throat worked like she wanted to shout fraud, manipulation, something. But there was nothing left to claw at. No leverage. No fallback. Just a signature. Her own. Connor leaned forward now, whispering something into her ear. I didn't hear what he said, but she pulled her arm away. And for the first time in years, she looked small. Cornered. Not the radiant woman in white. Just a woman who realized she'd walked into court with an empty purse and handed over the keys to a kingdom she never even learned how to enter. I leaned back in my chair. Not a word. I didn't need one. It was Marla who delivered the kill shot. Not dramatically. Not like in the movies. No finger-pointing, no theatrics. She simply opened her briefcase, pulled out a thin stack of papers with a blue binder clip, and slid them across the table with 2 fingers like she was handing over a receipt for dry cleaning. Your Honor, she said, voice clear, emotionless, for the record, and in response to any implied ambiguity regarding the estate structure, we're submitting full documentation detailing the respondent's asset restructuring, all dated and filed prior to the petitioner's initial divorce filing. The judge took them without a blink. Melissa stared at the papers like they were in a foreign language. Her fingers hovered over them, but didn't touch. What is that? She asked, eyes darting to Darren. Marla answered. The irrevocable trust, Ms. Hayes. The one your husband legally executed over a year ago. Triggered by spousal abandonment, as defined in the original prenuptial and supplemental agreements. All assets moved under trustee control, independently managed, non-reversible. The only marital liquid fund left available at the time of your filing was the joint checking account, which, as we've agreed, contains $48,000. Melissa's hand shot out. She snatched the papers, flipping through them like she could find an escape clause by turning the pages fast enough. No, she whispered, then louder. No, this is fraud. He tricked me. She stood up so fast the chair screeched against the tile. Sophie flinched behind her. Connor sat completely still, eyes narrowed, jaw clenched like he was realizing he should have paid closer attention during pillow talk. The judge looked up at Melissa, unfazed. You signed, Ms. Hayes, he said flatly. He disclosed. You just didn't read. It wasn't a gavel that made the sound. It was the silence that followed. Melissa was trembling now. Not tears, not yet. Just the unmistakable shift from disbelief to humiliation. Her gaze bounced from the judge to Darren to Marla and finally landed on me. And for the first time in a very long time, she looked like someone who knew exactly what she'd lost. "Are you kidding me?" she hissed, looking at Darren, her voice rising. "You told me we had control of the firm, that the house was community property. You said we'd win. You said that," Darren muttered under his breath, suddenly rearranging his papers with furious interest. Melissa's hand shook as she jabbed a finger at the trust documentation. "I didn't see this. This wasn't." Marla didn't even look up. It was in the response packet. Page 11. Initialed by you. Melissa turned to me again. Her eyes were wild now, no longer confident or cunning. Just pure panic behind a collapsing mask. "You planned this," she spat. "You planned this from the beginning. You knew I was going to leave." I finally spoke. Not knew, just listened. She stared. I smiled. Nothing big. Just enough for her to see that I'd been waiting for this moment. Not to gloat, not to humiliate her. Just to end the illusion. The judge turned back to his docket, disinterested in the emotional aftershocks. "If there are no other objections, we'll proceed to finalize the terms." Melissa opened her mouth again, but no sound came. Because there was no case left to make. Only ash. The gavel didn't fall that day. It didn't need to. She did. The house was quiet in the way only freedom can be. Not the hollow kind of silence, not grief, not shock. Just stillness. The kind of peace that doesn't ask for permission. 3 weeks had passed since court. 3 weeks since she stood in that courtroom in white, demanding a crown from the ashes. I'd moved into the lake house, the one she never liked. Said it was too minimal, too masculine. I used to joke that it was too honest for her taste. Now, it was home. A deck that looked out over still water, bourbon in hand, no one asking where I'd been or why I was quiet. The sun was sinking into the lake like a secret being buried. The bourbon was smooth. The ice had almost melted. Then my phone buzzed. A single message. From Melissa. "You destroyed me. You poisoned our daughter. I hope it was worth it." I stared at it. Not with anger. Not with guilt. Just with clarity. She didn't say you lied or you manipulated me. She said you destroyed me. As if she were the victim in a story she wrote in lipstick and lies. Poisoned our daughter? No. I gave Sophie the same choice I gave Melissa. I stayed still. I didn't chase. I didn't beg. They walked. I just let them. Out of habit more than anything, I opened Sophie's page. She'd posted 2 days ago something about finding peace through boundaries. But now her profile was blank. Blocked. No message. No call. Just digital erasure. She'd made her choice. I wasn't surprised. For her, this was a loyalty test she never signed up for, and failed anyway. Because deep down, she wanted to believe in her mother's fantasy. That love was messy but always justified. That betrayal could be repackaged as growth. I closed the app. Deleted Melissa's message. No reply. No, I understand. Nothing. Because there's nothing left to understand. They didn't just cheat. They collaborated. They built a whole damn narrative. Cast me as the villain. And now that it collapsed under real-world weight, contracts, signatures, truth, I was suddenly the executioner. Let them believe that. Let them live in the version where I was the monster, because facing the mirror would take more courage than either of them owned. The sun kissed the horizon. The bourbon caught the light. For the first time in over a decade, I wasn't wondering where anyone was. I wasn't tiptoeing around moods or waiting for the other shoe to drop. I was alone, not abandoned, not left, excused. From the performance, from the pretense, from the slow suffocation of a house that called itself home but hadn't been one in years. She thought I'd grieve. She thought she'd win. All I did was let her hang herself with paperwork and ego. And now, at last, I could breathe. Not because I'd won, but because I'd finally stopped pretending that she ever loved me at all.